And so when you were working at the Air Force, I mean, what was the acceptance of using open source there, and how did that work?
Yeah, for the most part, people were fine with the usage of it. There's a lot of opinions about how you're supposed to interpret the policy surrounding open source technologies. There are some policies where you're supposed to pay for support, and then there's interpretations of that like, okay, well, if we pay for a team that knows this open source technology, is that enough, or do we have to go back to the vendor to pay for it, or does it is there an advantage to us using open source? And there's a lot of like things to kind of like work through or deal with some of the more compliance or side of things. But generally, as far as usage of open source, most folks wind up actually using it and pulling things in. There are cases where certain projects that aren't well known yet can be difficult to bring in, though, because it's kind of like a who else is using this in the DoD, or who else is using this in this government organization. And if it's something new that you're trying to bring in from open source, that can be difficult because there isn't that sort of built-in trust yet with
Right.
certain things. Um, but yeah, overall usage is fine. I think the bigger thing that I've tried to think about and push is like contributing back, and the importance of doing that. Um, because you like usage is one thing, it's cool, but if you actually do start to contribute back, there's a lot of like power that that gives you as an organization, and in the direction of certain things, and having your use cases tailored for yourself. um, and I think that's some of what Defense Unicorns finds with like the Department of Defense. There's like air gap is huge for the DoD, but it's not really maybe for a lot of other organizations. There are some industries where it's important, but if the DoD actually gets involved in open source, and then they can actually drive these sorts of changes upstream. And with Zarf, obviously, it's one project. It helps you with air gap things, but it depends on so many other things. Like when Container D makes a change to the way that they interpret image pulling from local host addresses, which is a thing we've run into. Like then, you have to have a mechanism to resolve that. You have to have a way to go to the Container D maintainers, talk to them, and say, hey, here's this thing. Is there a way we can work around this, work together, come to a solution, and then commit it and get it merged in and released? Um, and without that engagement, then like you're basically just cutting yourself off. You're saying, okay, well, this technology's lost or done to me. I can't do anything with it because it doesn't fit my use case. When really like a few lines change maybe could make it fit your use case, and then you could take advantage of it.
Right. It
So
almost sounds like Defense Unicorns is one of your value adds to the Department of Defense is the fact that you can provide that vendor relationship to an open source ecosystem and deliver something that looks a lot more like a product to the DoD, although you're actually leveraging your open source community to do that. And from a business model, it seems to make sense because it's easy for you to do Zarf in the open because I'm sure that as you find more air gapped industries that are interested in engaging and participating in that community, you're providing a service, so to speak, to the DoD where you're using tools like Zarf to be able to deliver that. So it seems like it's a really nice match between what the DoD needs and a way to actually sustain an open source ecosystem based on what you're delivering and the value you're delivering, which is tangential to the open source, but you're pulling value and getting paid for something else.
right, right. Yeah, and the hope is that we can bring other defense contractors kind of along with us. I mean, there are other ones. Lockheed Martin has an OSPO, an open source program office, and there is other movement in this space. And like the hope is that like this is a multi-billion-dollar industry. If we can bring them into open source, and it helps to one, it helps the DoD to take advantage of all this technology, but it also helps the taxpayers. I mean, this is their money
Yeah.
ultimately.
Yeah.
And so that kind of feeds back, which is cool.